Good afternoon and welcome back to another set of videos in which we continue to learn about the out-of-the-box functionalities of human resources. So this is the window that you've seen so many times. It is Dynamics 365, Finance and Operation, and we are talking about the human resource module. So previous videos talked a lot about the configuration pieces. It talked about some of the functionalities that is available. And today we're simply going to touch base on the education piece. So we've also talked about the certifications, we've talked about the courses. Today we'll talk about the education. So the out-of-the-box functionality of the human resource module, based on the education piece, is simply as an informative. Uh, so what I mean by that is simply it's the for informational purposes, of course, is to capture the information. You can always run reports and whatnot. That's a different story to talk about. Because Power BI gets involved in it, and there you could develop a personal set of reports, you could say, using the technical resources. It's just something different to talk about. Anyway, in regards to the out of the box functionality, if I were to click on one of these employees and I click on education, for instance, as you could see that there is a education piece that I have actually no configuration was required actually, but it was simply inputted by Mike. So if you were to click new, and then you will have the education. We can have a drop down menu of it. So if I were to edit, I can't edit anymore. So if I were to click on new, these are the different kind of educations that you can configure. So we've talked about how you can configure that. If you don't know how to configure it, simply click on the drop down and you're going to view details. It will open up a new form and then you can simply enter that. So it's a very simple configuration to do. So it will show up on the drop down menu once you save that form. So what you can do is for Arnie, for instance, we know that she had some form of accounting education. So we click on accounting, the description, it's editable. You can edit it to even further enhance or provide a description of what this is education is all about. You can put the institution and degrees, level of education. In a lot of different countries, there's a different set of levels. In Canada, for instance, you can have a diploma, and then you can have a bachelor, then you can have a master's degree, and then a doctorate. Even high school is very applicable. So this is where you could see the masters here. And vocational. So I'm not too sure what vocational might have been. This is simply a configuration that was done when I had the license for this testing environment. So it could be applicable to some other countries. But it doesn't really matter, to be honest, because you can have any form of level of education. It's a matter of configuration. So you do the same thing as what we did for education. A form will fill up and you basically give a level of education and select a level of education for this employee. So they had a bachelor's in accounting, for instance. Secondary emphasis basically is the minor. So in Canada, at least, there is a major and then you can do a minor. So you can do a major in accounting, a minor in business. So you can have that text field here. So you can treat that as a secondary emphasis. Institution, you can have quite a few institution, however many, of course, that you would like. So it's a drop-down menu. Select that. The end date. So when did the education completed? What was the last semester? When it was graduated? Duration, you can have usually 4 years of a program is a bachelor's degree, but not relevant. If you would like to pull it up into a different type of reports, then it makes sense to have this field. Unit, it's predefined, and so you can't really configure this because it's a drop-down menu. But in all honesty, this really doesn't make sense to me because everybody knows that a bachelor degree would be for 4 years, and when you do your master's, it could be 2 to 3 years, and if you do your postdoc, that's another 4 years or so. So unit, not a mandatory field, but for reference purposes, you could use that. In terms of the grade point average, of course, the skill, some institutions have 4.33, others have 4.0. So what was the average there? How many credits were completed for this education? And this information is pre-filled if you were to select the institution on top. So all of that is configured, so you don't need to worry about putting this in there. It will be retrieved on this form itself. and the start date. So we did see the end date at the top. This is the start date, when the month and the year the bachelor's degree started for this in particular employee. If there's a degree in progress, so you want to know how many credits have been earned and how many credits are still pending or required in total. You can get that difference of it by yourself, and then additional notes here. So as mentioned, this is all for the informational purposes. If you want to run reports against these particular education, for instance, then you can develop reports. We can always talk about the dashboards. I think they're within the dashboards of employee self-service workspace and then personnel management. You have these pre-built um, dashboards with reports. Those are Power BI embedded reports that it allows you to filter through education and whatnot. So we can always talk about that at some point. But if you need something more in particular, further into more detail about this report, then you most likely would have to develop it or use Power BI. Okay, so that we kind of covered very quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are for very informational. So we've done the configuration, of course, and now this is some of the functionalities that you can simply use for your reporting and whatnot. So this, as an HR manager, your job basically is to make sure that everything is up to date, all your records are up to date, so what are your employees looking into, what are their interests, where are their career progressions and whatnot. So these are all the things that you would need to worry about. And in terms of the positions of trust and test, let's talk about that. Actually, positions of trust, I personally haven't used. I don't think it's very relevant. None of my implementations have ever used it. Something to look into. You can always have some form of position of trust. I guess you can use it, but like I've never seen a use of it in my implementation. So we can always go into the Microsoft documentation to read about what this is all about. But as far as I know, no HR manager was ever interested in the position of trust because they've never used that form. The test, however, is pretty relevant. These can be treated as different kinds of tests that an employee might have taken. So let's click on new and see what are the pre-configured tests available in this. So you could see that there's a work sample simulation or a physical ability, and this is all configurable. So it really depends on the requirement here. In terms of tests, I haven't used this for any informational purposes, but there are some organizations that can use these tests, and normally the this test can be used for vaccination, but screenings is also part of vaccination. So it would be very dependent on the design, on the ability to capture the information where to. So you could use this form. You can always use the screening form for testing as well. But in this case, a physical ability, that's the test that you need to complete, required by you put in a day, for instance, and then it's for informational purposes. So status is either complete, pass, or a fail, or not complete in this case. And score received. So what was the score of that test? And that's pretty much it. So you simply save that information, and that's all you do with it. You could always pull this information out using Power BI, but for informational purposes from out of the box functionality, I don't see any reports related to simply tests. So if that is absolutely required, then you would be touching Power BI or some custom reports. So with that, I will leave us to more exploration. I will see you in the next video. We're going to start talking about skills and perhaps the reviews and goals, which is a bit more interesting topic to talk about.